Welcome, everyone. I'm Madeline DiNono, President and CEO of the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media. With me is our esteemed ASL interpreters. First up is Nicole Pancino, and then we will have Christine Mitchell. Please remember to pin their video if you would like to keep them on screen throughout the event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that in New York City, we are on the traditional land of the Lenape peoples, past and present, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through the generations. The name Manhattan actually derives from the Lenape word for island, which is Manatee. So each time we say Manhattan, remember that we are evoking the memory of the Lenape people. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our founder and chair, Geena Davis.
Thank you, Madeline. Welcome, everyone. Great to see so many of you here. Some of you may be wondering why the Institute is hosting a CJ Salon on cyber safety. So let me clear up any confusion you may have. As you know, the pandemic dramatically increased reliance on our digital infrastructure, which is accompanied by new and escalating cybersecurity threats. One of our longtime supporters, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, has committed more than $50 million to spotlight the importance of cybersecurity and make the world safer for women and girls. Craig and his partners are equipping each of us with education and easy to deploy tools to make the digital world safer from cyber attacks. When we heard about this initiative, we knew that content creators and the media community had a vital role to play in amplifying messages, busting tropes and stereotypes that persist on screen, expanding career opportunities, and significantly shifting the narrative on how the public views cybersecurity. We know from our research that portrayals and storytelling in media have a real impact on shaping our beliefs and perceptions of what is possible in our lives. We were most interested in how this investment would make the world a better and safer place for women and girls. So today, you will hear from a panel of experts on career opportunities within the science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM fields, and learn how the increased focus on cybersecurity can open new job opportunities for you, and how media can play an important role in protecting you, your family, and our society. Our theory of change is very simple. If she can see it, she can be it. And with cybersecurity content creators and each of us having an important role to play, I hope everyone joining us today will be inspired. To learn more, without further ado, I would like to introduce our dear friend, Craig Newmark, founder of Craigslist and Craig Newmark Philanthropies. Over to you, Craig.
Folks, thanks. I appreciate it. The deal is people are asking why 50 million or more now for cyber civil defense. The deal is that right now our country is under attack. People are under attack in a way that's never really happened. In World War II, the country was occasionally under attack, and what people did was that everyone was expected to play a role if they could. And that's the deal behind this idea of cyber civil defense. Everyone plays a role protecting each other as they see fit. My deal with Craig Newmark Philanthropies is that, well, I guess I got lucky. As one critic says, I fell bass backwards onto a big pile of money, and I should do something about it for the common good. And that's what's going on right now. The reflection is that any success I've had over the last 20 or 30 years has been by accidentally being in the right time and the right place, which I guess makes me the Forrest Gump of the internet. The deal is that with the Cyber Civil Defense program is to make sure that people know about what's going on with this, and to provide education and training for everyone to protect themselves and potentially to protect the country, specifically providing education for everyone, and I really mean everyone, in a way that could lead seamlessly to careers in cybersecurity, either in industry or, for that matter, in government. And that's the theme of a lot of the people that I'm working with, including the emerging consortium of cyber clinics led by Ann Cleveland, and for that matter, the work at Girls Who Code, which will help everyone learn enough about cybersecurity, again, to protect the people around them, maybe leading to actual careers in cybersecurity, which are open to everyone right now, open to everyone in a way that we need to reinforce in a big way. Cybersecurity is just one theme in terms of getting people protected. I'm working with the Coalition Against Online Violence, including the International Women's Media Foundation, a group called Right to Be, PEN America, and others, which are trying to figure out how to prevent or respond to harassment online, which is a big deal. That also includes Wikipedia, which has an effort to prevent the harassment of women writers and editors in Wikipedia, and how to greatly increase the number of women involved in writing and editing at Wikipedia. We need to proceed from there in terms of getting the media community to amplify these positive messages. The Coalition Against Online Violence is a big part of that, but we need to keep reminding people in the media that they need to deal with online stereotypes and to keep reasserting positive messages. That's the shortest version I have to deal with this. You know, after all, a nerd's got to do what a nerd's got to do. Madeline, please take it from here.
And we love you, Craig, for being the so-called nerd that you are and for everything that you're doing. And I want to build on what Craig said, because not only are we under attack, but we're being constantly bombarded with messaging and misinformation on a multitude of platforms simultaneously. And it's really important that we take control of our digital lives and protect not only ourselves, but our family, friends, allies, and communities. There are so many ways to dispel myths about cybersecurity, which is the topic of our discussion. And I would love to welcome our panel of esteemed experts. I'm going to ask everyone to pop on screen. And I would like to welcome Dr. Tarika Barrett, CEO of Girls Who Code; Katie Brooks, Director, Cyber Partnerships, Aspen Digital; Rachel Cornejo, Enterprise Cybersecurity Consultant and alumna of the Citizen Clinic at UC Berkeley's Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity; and Marta Telado, President and CEO of Consumer Reports. So welcome, everyone. It is such a privilege to have you all, here today. And the first round of questions is really going to be about how could entertainment dispel, impede, bust these myths that we see in the make-believe world that could possibly translate to the real world, as Craig mentioned early on. And Tarika, you are like-minded in that, our motto is, if she could see it, she could be it. And your motto is, you can't be what you can't see. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the importance of role models. You had kind of talked about how kind of what we see, there's the typical big 3 or 4, in tech, but we don't see our own big 3 or 4. And so I would love for you to talk about that.
Thank you so much, Madeline. And honestly, just hearing from Craig and also Geena in her opening remarks, you're right. You can't be what you can't see. And what we're grappling with right now is that there is this lack of visible role models, either real or fiction in media. And we need to figure out a way to elevate these stories. I want to offer a really salient example of this. I know everyone can relate. In 2012, I believe, The Hunger Games and Brave both came out on the big screen. And guess what happened? We saw a 50% increase in the number of girls and women pursuing archery. It turns out, what we do depends on a lot on what we see, and that there's this powerful connection between the imagery on screen and real life. And our kids, as you said, they hear about the Bill Gates, the Mark Zuckerberg, the Steve Jobs, but what about Katherine Johnson or Mary Jackson or Grace Hopper or Ada Lovelace? These are incredible female pioneers in tech that our community, they just don't hear about them. We still are wrestling with this archetype that remains either a programmer, that's a boy wearing a hoodie in his parents' basement, or some guy, running a company in Silicon Valley. And what we have found at Girls Who Code is that before girls have even hit double digits, they've already internalized these powerful cultural touchstones about what a computer scientist looks like and does. And these images stick with them from elementary school all the way through the workforce. And yes, we do see some hopeful narratives, right? When you think about the movie Hidden Figures, where we actually got a chance to see Black female mathematicians, who put America's space program on the map. But beyond that, I also want to say that changing the narrative isn't just about that. It's also, it's who can work in STEM, but also what a career in STEM can look like. One of the things we're seeing in media that we need to pay a lot of attention to is the toxicity of tech. We know right now that that is a very dominant narrative in terms of the bad things that are happening. Think about Hulu's shows, right? Either Uber or Theranos or something else where tech is central, but the narrative is one that's toxic. We're at risk. We could end up creating this binary that our young people are paying attention to that tells them you can either have a career in tech that makes you money, or you can have a career that, changes the world and your community and that you love. And we have to do better. We have to be more nuanced, right? That we send a message, especially to our girls, especially our Black and brown girls who are marginalized and shut out of these opportunities, that you can pursue a career in tech and find joy, not in spite of it, but because of it. And I think of a couple of quick examples of things we've done at Girls Who Code. This past year, we, launched the world's first ever codable music video with Doja Cat. And you could change the colors in the video and do all these incredible things, unlocking your passion and creativity. And we also have this campaign called Make That Change, where we really solidified and cemented this powerful message for girls and women that says, okay, you want to pursue a career in tech, not only will you be able to change your community and the world, but you can change your own personal and financial trajectory at the same time. You can harness the passion and the creativity. You don't have to make that kind of choice. So I think we have to kind of push the industry to, push against some of these narratives that are really dominant right now.
Well, thank you so much for that. And just a little anecdote. So some of you may or may not know that Geena actually qualified for the Olympic trials in archery, and we actually conducted a study. So I'll ask Jasmine, who's our senior director of events, or Mary Ellen, our senior advisor, to maybe pop in the chat our link to our little archery story, which talked about that, phenomenal increase. So Katie, you talked about, and building on what Tarika said about that hacker in the hoodie is what we usually see. And you said something about how can we talk about kind of compelling stories that go beyond kind of gloom and doom. Can you talk about some of the storylines that you'd like to see that kind of counter that, what Tarika was also saying?
Sure, I would be happy to. And I will say I've been in this field now going on about 7 years, and the people that I've worked shoulder to shoulder with, they're not just one-dimensional people. They're fascinating people who have really great stories about why they got into this field, who they are as people, why they're passionate about this work. And so I really want to bust that myth that all of this work is just shot in shadows and, is constantly kind of a difficult battle to win. Certainly it is, but there's everyday heroism that happens in this field that just isn't reported on and isn't talked about. And I've seen that firsthand. So I think there's several movies and other documentaries that have come out in the past about World War II, speaking to Craig's example, where you hear about these small acts of heroism that actually shifted the entire course of the war. And I want everybody to know that's happening today, right now in cybersecurity, and it deserves a storyline. And finally, I do want to kind of flip the question that you initially started with. And when you asked, how can the entertainment bust stereotypes? I'd like to ask, how will the media know when they're succeeding in busting stereotypes? And so I love the example that Tarika used. I'd also like to reference a study. So there's a draw a scientist experiment that's been running for over 50 years. And as you can imagine, the first several decades, when asked to draw a scientist, kids would always draw, an older white man in a white coat with glasses, etc. But recently we've seen that shift. And we're seeing that because people have different spheres of influence and different mentors and different conceptions of what is possible. So I'm really excited that all of us here are a part of that shift for cybersecurity.
Thank you so much. And I want to build on what Kitty was saying about there's everyday heroism, but also there's making things, kind of normalizing things kind of within your home and within your family. And Rachel, I'm going to turn over to you. You had mentioned also about flipping roles and talking about like, why is it always the older brother? What happens in a family dynamic? If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that we need more women on screen who, are fun and cool and also really good at technology. And I think media and entertainment media is huge for that because it's where young girls see who they might want to be when they grow up, right? And so kind of my thinking is, on a show like iCarly that so many young girls watch, Spencer is her older brother and he's a professional artist. Why can't we have the cool older sister who's a professional technologist? What if Elsa was good at science? What if the people who supply ingenious devices or hacks in James Bond movies, instead of being kind of the men with their heads down, are amazing female women in tech. And I feel lucky enough that in my own tech journey, I had some role models at UC Berkeley's Human Rights Center that were women in tech and showed me how to do it. But I think we need to see this on screen.
Thank you so much. And I want to give some context. So we've had the privilege of also working with Lyda Hill Philanthropies, and she has provided funding for us to actually look at STEM in the world of make-believe. And just to give you a sense, when we did our first analysis of the portrayals of STEM, which we looked at life sciences, computer science, physical science, engineering, math, it was about a 15-to-1 ratio of male characters to female characters. And just to drill down a little bit more on what everyone was talking about, only 2.4% of tens of thousands of make-believe female characters were engineers. Only 8% were computer science. Most of the female characters are relegated, which it's great, like 60-70% to doctors, but they're forgetting about the rest of the scientific opportunities. So I'm going to go over to Marta, because you had talked about the nerd, and the geek, and not having enough, role models in real life and in the make-believe world. And so I'd love to just hear from you as well.
Well, I think it's overwhelming. I think all of us are coming to this with a real alignment that the media is an incredibly potent tool and has an enormous impact. And it is about storytelling. And we need to tell stories that highlight the power and potential of women and girls in a field that is really coming into its own. And we need to see more images of that. I love that have been presented about hidden figures. And we have, and there is some history, right? We remember Erin Brockovich in Silkwood, and now we need to see some of those images brought to life. And one of the things that I think we don't hear about enough, and obviously when you think about the world of entertainment, they are looking for stories and looking for people to model. And we have those leaders, and we need to be talking about the amazing superhero women that are already there. People like Megan Smith, who was the chief technology officer of the United States, and an advisor to President Obama in the White House. And then LaTanya Sweeney, she happened to be a former board member that I recruited to Consumer Reports. She was the former chief technology officer at the Federal Trade Commission that sits so much at the crossroads of what is happening in our digital world. And right now she's heading up Harvard's Public Interest Tech Lab. That is remarkable. And so if we need to see folks in the real world, women making a difference to model some of these characters, there are many women with all the dimensionality that many of us are talking about. They can be geeks, they can be all those things, and not just the guy in the hoodie in the back room. I think the power of media is the creative imagination that it taps into, and drawing us into that world in a way that we might never have had exposure to. So I think it's a powerful, powerful thing that Geena is doing and alerting us to. Thank you.
Thank you. And Craig, before we move on to the next round, I just wanted, if you wanted to contribute or say anything, wanted you to be able to get your 2 cents in before we moved on to the next round.
The panelists can speak for the issues much better than I can. Mart is doing remarkable work at Consumer Reports, Katie at Aspen, Tarika at Girls Who Code, and Rachel at the consortium of cybersecurity clinics. I think I'll stop talking now.
And listening to the thunder that's making me jump in my chair in in New York City. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is how can we make the world safer for women and girls? And Tarika, I'm going to go back to you because you've taught what, over half a 500,000 girls, and clearly, aside from giving them skills and competencies, this has to be embedded. So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with Girls Who Code so that they understand how to keep themselves, their sisters safe, their friends safe, their mothers safe?
Yeah, such a great question. And I think there are so many different ways that you can answer it, especially as you think about how you can define safety for women and girls worldwide and also in our own country. And you named it, from physical safety to emotional and social safety. And, when I think about what safety means through the lens of my work at Girls Who Code, and as a lifelong educator and activist, for me, I imagine a world where girls and women, regardless of their background, have equitable access to the education they deserve and to thriving careers, right, that offer them economic independence, because we know safety is so tied to economic power and independence. And we've seen this firsthand through our work at Girls Who Code. We know what it means when a young woman becomes the first in her family to go to college, gets a lucrative job, and can move their family into a nicer apartment or can help pay for groceries. Folks listening might think that this is some small thing in the grand scheme of what we're dealing with in America right now, as we grapple with institutionalized and ingrained racism and sexism that's harming the most marginalized groups in the country. But for me, even if one student at Girls Who Code can create a better life for themselves or disrupt cycles of violence or generational poverty, I know I've done my job. And I believe there is tremendous safety and opportunity, access, and independence.
Thank you so much. So Katie, over to you. What does safety look like from your point of view?
So for me, I think making the world safer for women and girls involves getting more women and girls designing the tools that they actually use. Women are strong and smart and empowered, and they should be viewed not just as people who need cybersecurity protection, but the people who can be the protectors. And across the technology space right now, we see that both digital and cybersecurity tools are being developed for end users. And the end users, in theory, are supposed to be the general population. Yet these teams don't actually have significant portions of the end user population represented on them. So how can you really develop for the end user if you're not including those perspectives in your development cycle? The other thing to address here in cybersecurity is that some of the bad guys out there, they're going to be thinking of every possible way to get into your network. So if you have a team that's going to be subject to groupthink because you've assembled a team of people who look, think, and act alike, you're actually doing a disservice, not just to your business or to your team or what have you. It can even be a disservice to national security. We need all of these different perspectives to actually get to better cybersecurity solutions.
Thank you for that. So Rachel, in terms of your, perspective in keeping the world safe for women and girls, how are you and your organization working to do that?
Yeah, so I can talk a little about the way that the consortium for cybersecurity clinics is doing it. So I think that something really important nowadays in terms of keeping the world safer for women and girls is cybersecurity for reproductive rights organizations and activists and those seeking abortions, right? Especially given this current political climate. And so when I worked at UC Berkeley as a participant in one of these public interest cybersecurity clinics that kind of function similarly to pro bono law clinics where students volunteer time to help nonprofits, it was called Citizen Clinic. I think it's really important to, first of all, I'm really grateful that I got to do that kind of work. And second of all, I think it's really important to think about the specific threats facing women, right? Like reproductive rights, and then have security based on those threats, right? So for example, like Twitter threats against women and women's rights advocates is a huge cybersecurity issue that's not talked about in kind of the traditional sort of hacker mentality. That's a huge cyber issue that I've worked on. Other examples, bringing mental health into the conversation is really, really huge. So I kind of like to refer to a security triangle and say that you can't have proper digital and physical security without psychosocial security, right? Without keeping sort of your mental health in check and understanding that with cybersecurity, so much of it is about fear, right? If I am seeking an abortion, I'm afraid that an extremist will find out that I'm doing that and surveil me, right? What kinds of decisions is that going to lead me to make? And so kind of to that end, I think sharing of feminist security and wellness guides is really important because everyone needs to learn how to take control of their own security. I worked with a nonprofit that did I started a nonprofit that did some of that toolkit distribution work. It's called Rated Resilient. I believe the link will be dropped to the chat to some of our practical security toolkits and also links to mental health resources to kind of deal with the mental health impacts of a cybersecurity incident or a cyber breach and deal with some of that fear. But I think to make the world safer for women and girls, we just need to distribute more and more of those resources and understand that the threats facing women and girls in the cyber world are going to be different than the threats facing men and others in the cyber world. And so I think that we need to prioritize resource sharing accordingly.
Thank you very much. So Marta, I know you're going to have a lot to talk about, and maybe you can tell us about the fabulous grant you just received. And just to build on what Rachel was saying, staying safe means not only making smart decisions, but also having the right solutions and tools in your safety toolkit. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'd love to, Madeline. And, Consumer Reports has always believed, and you're hearing it from many of this wonderful panel, that tools and knowledge empower, right? And there are parts of our digital lives today that unfairly target women and girls in harmful ways. And you've heard from anything from harassment to cyber stalking. And so how do you create the right tools and empower women with tools to keep themselves safe online? That's an imperative. And one of the things we're so excited about is the grant that you mentioned in partnership with Craig, $5 million grant that's really going to help us scale up the research, the testing, the investigative journalism, and the advocacy so that we can inform, empower, and protect. Part of this work is also the advice and the advocacy on the specific dangers that certain communities face, particularly women and girls. And I'll just give you an example that I love. And I know that Craig has supported gender-focused organizations in cybersecurity, including the Girl Scouts. And what as a former Girl Scout myself, I was really excited to see that there are now cybersecurity badges, right? You can get a badge in cyber basics to cyber investigator. It is never too early to start educating and informing and empower. And I will say we don't stop at that. One of the things that we also feel very strongly at CR is accountability, right? The burden, yes, we have to empower ourselves and have knowledge, but right now, an overwhelming amount of the burden is on us to empower and to inform ourselves. We also have to keep government and company leaders accountable. And another way to do that is by a different tool that we are pushing hard, and that is the creation of what we call cybersecurity nutrition labels. Think about when you go food shopping and you have nutrition labels on all the food that you're buying.
I think Maria froze up on us for a bit. We'll give her a sec to come back. I love this idea of cybersecurity labels, that it's just like when
You know what you're getting, you know what potential. Think about the devices and the tools that we create of who we are in the information. Connection issues, but I'm going to keep talking and hope that you can hear me. So the labels also help you make choices, like, is this product going to be protecting my data? Who's it selling my product, my data to? What precautions might I take? Am I getting automatic updates that are safe, that keep me safe? And what, if anything, are the hidden threats embedded in that software? So I'm really excited about the tools we're creating and that the grant is making possible. I love the opportunity to spread the word about the kinds of things that we can do working together.
So Maria, I do have a follow-up question for you, and Craig, of course, I welcome for you to chime in. So for example, I'm in the App Store. I hope Apple is embracing this, and I'm about to download, I don't know, something to make my Instagram post better. Do you ideally, would there be like another box as I scroll through all the information that would say something about it? I mean, is that where you would ideally like to see this cybersecurity nutrition label?
Well, I'd love to see it there. I'd love to see it at point of purchase. I'd love to see it when you're about to download something. And obviously that is one tool, but Madeline and I'd love to turn it to Craig. The other thing we also want to do by holding these companies' feet to the fire is, we're providing the tools to do that now, but we need to live in a world where security is the default, right? Where, we are constantly having to update ourselves on making the right choices, but in lieu of that, we are going to keep working and pressing hard to make privacy and security a default in the devices that course through our lives. Craig, I'd love to turn it over to you.
First, the idea of including the nutrition labels in the app stores is one of those obvious things that I sure never thought about. So I'm going to be relying on people here to remind me ruthlessly, to remind people at Apple and Google about that. The deal is that big companies, there's factions who want to make things better and people who may be focused elsewhere. The deal is to reinforce the good while perhaps gently suggesting that the people who are thinking otherwise reflect otherwise. I'm making light of things which are really, really sensitive. And as a nerd, my strengths are not in encouraging this kind of thing, but I've dedicated the next 20 years or so to doing this. I do remind the people who are involved in these things that, like Batman says, I'm not the nerd you want, but I may be the nerd you need. Hitting the mute button again.
Thank you so much for that. Well, for any of our friends from Apple who are on the line, or Google, you'll be getting a communique from us sooner than later. So the next kind of round of questions we wanted to talk about, we talked about what we want to see in the world of make-believe. We talked about how to safeguard for women and girls, but now we want to get back to the career of it. How do we build this pipeline? How do we see the next generation of cybersecurity executives be led by women and girls? So Tarika, I'm going to go back over to you because, I mean, you've built a workforce of 115,000 plus, girls. So I'd love for you to talk about that. And also, you had mentioned earlier on a program with, I'm going to say CISA, but it's CISA. I may not be saying the moniker.
Yeah,
correctly.
CISA, you got it. No, happy to, Madeline. Thank you so much for that question. The pipeline question has to be the thing that we focus in on, and I think many panelists have already alluded to this. It has to be created with tremendous intentionality And it has to be designed to meet our young people at every critical turning point. You know, we started, Madeline, with the discussion of how media images can alienate girls from computer science at very young ages. And the thing that we have found, we often call it the middle school cliff, you know, somewhere between the ages of 13 and 17, where girls, you know, lose interest and all of society's assumptions around identity and intelligence coalesce and chip away at a girl's sense of what's possible. They drop out before they even get to middle school. And that's why, you know, at Girls Who Code, we've created programs that start in elementary school and continue up to college and even into career. You know, it's about engaging our youngest students and building an interest in STEM, and then inspiring our high school age students to pursue computer science in college. And then, you know, when you're in college, you got to focus in on persistence, right? So they don't, you know, drop out. We don't see the pipeline leaky there. And then for us now, and especially, you know, exacerbated with the pandemic, it's making sure that we're providing our community with the tools they need to land that entry-level job in tech. And as you said, we are so proud of having taught 500,000 girls computer science. And of that 500,000, we have 115 college and workforce age young women ready to take on these jobs of the future. And, you know, but it doesn't really end there. It's just the tip of the iceberg. We need to push tech, the industry, these companies to create a more equitable environment. Everyone has a role to play, right, in terms of nurturing and building this pipeline, especially those already in industry or at these top companies. Everyone saying at least that they are desperate to hire diverse talent. What I often say, and I say this a lot, employers have to broaden the scope of where they're looking for strong candidates. Top universities get all the attention from recruiters, right? But what about community colleges and state schools? I myself went to CUNY, you know, Brooklyn College undergrad. I wouldn't be given the time of day by some of these recruiters. The focus on four-year universities, typically Ivy League, continues to offer this very narrow and privileged sense of success, shutting out historically marginalized students. And the result is that we keep failing to bring that much needed diversity to tech companies. And I think we have to push companies to move beyond this notion of it just being about filling diversity quotas. We also have to ask workplaces to tackle the toxic culture that we know continues to alienate young women. We have these traits of a white supremacist work culture: perfectionism, professionalism, power hoarding, paternalism. This is synonymous with tech right now in terms of the stories that you hear, often ones of harm. And, you know, how this has resulted in a concentration of power in tech leadership. It's how we continue to fuel that bro culture and how it also leads to burnout. We did a study, Girls Who Code did with Accenture, and found that half of women leave tech roles by the age of 35 because they found their workplaces to be inhospitable to women, or they just didn't see, Madeline, female role models that they could relate to. But we also found that if we could make these workplaces more inclusive, we could increase the number of women working in tech by 3 million. And so what we try to do at Girls Who Code, not only do we teach girls computer science and we bust these stereotypes around who belongs, but we also try to push companies to look deeply at practices, right? Interrogate what they're doing to alienate women and people of color, and what they're doing to prevent them from being hired in the first place. And I wish there was some, you know, blueprint or magical, you know, way to do this, but we're just saying, be introspective around your practices. You know, this kind of self-reflection is difficult, but it's going to be the difference between an all-white male office and an office that more accurately reflects the world we're living in today. And, you know, listen, any efforts that we make to tackle systemic racism and sexism, the root cause of the lack of diversity in tech, we're going to be met naturally by resistance, but we have to persist because the future of tech depends on us having a diverse tech workforce that is a reflection of the diverse world we live in.
So Tarika, I actually have a follow-up question for you, taking a page kind of out of the entertainment industry. So these 115,000, this workforce, is there a Girl Who Code database that if Google or, you know, the FANG of it want to find, you know, qualified candidates, they could go to your database and look up? Does that exist?
Madeline, they would like it to exist. I think lots of folks want the fast track to talent, but haven't always created the environment for it. But we're excited that there is this clamoring by companies to identify talent. And we've kind of come at it a couple of different ways. We don't have, I would call it a magical database, although we do bring together our students, primarily young women and, folks who identify as non-binary, to hiring summits, for example. And we had 2 of those during the pandemic, each with 1,000 students. And we had one company, for example, that hired 17 of them from one hiring summit alone. So we try to make sure that our corporate partners have access to our students, and we have newsletters and ways to get these companies and their opportunities in front of our young people. But we're still continuing to build that base and thinking about the most intentional and supportive ways to have on-ramps into these companies and their experiences. We don't just want to kind of be a repository for quote unquote talent. We're also pushing companies to be really thoughtful about what those early opportunities are. And we've been working on making sure that we design programs that scaffold some of this so that those early experiences are meaningful and that we actually don't have that revolving door I talked about where we're losing half of women in tech by the age of 35. And for that one company, for example, that hired 17, they created a community of support. They came in with intentional efforts to have mentorship programs, think about the trajectory, provide HR support, have a cohort model that would really support these young women in being successful. And that's the kind of partnership we're really looking for, not just placing students into jobs.
I agree with that. And, Craig, maybe there needs to be a different Craigslist list. Maybe it's Craigslist, angels, in tech. And I do think, one of the things that the British Film Institute did is that they had a sponsorship program where when someone was placed in a company, their first year salary was actually kind of protected and covered so that they were properly, onboarded. Because I agree with you. It's like, okay, you get the job, but then if you don't feel comfortable, you're not going to retain that talent. So I agree with you with that as a strategy. Craig, I don't know if you have anything you want to say.
There is some work going on along these lines by the Share the Mic and Cyber folks, which I think is currently or was centered at R Street. Maybe someone has done the research, so I won't have to remember.
Yep, and I think we have some of those links teed up and ready to go. We can go ahead and share those in the chat. That would be great.
And Katie, I'd love for you to build on that, because one of the things you had said is, we have to have diverse voices. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, how do we eliminate this leaky pipeline and build a stronger one?
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking about this and so many different ideas came to mind, but I tried to boil it down to 4 points. So number 1 is start early. Number 2 is tie cybersecurity to actual real life applications. Number 3 is break down barriers to entry. And the 4th one, which is my favorite, is finding community. So for that first one, Tarika, I love some of the examples you used about starting cybersecurity as a concept or CS as a concept early, making that more accessible. If you think about, children's games like hide and seek or Clue, or even just puzzles, all of those critical thinking exercises have applications that, when they're cultivated, translate perfectly into what we need for cybersecurity professionals. And right now, the country is facing a shortage. I think the latest number was something like 700,000 professionals is what we need to fill that gap. So let's take that extra step and make sure that we're cultivating some of that natural talent and curbing what we're seeing with that drop off in middle school that Tarika mentioned. And we've heard, I think, throughout the conversation about the great work at Girl Scouts, Girls Who Code. Also would love to highlight cyber.org, which is developing a K-12 cybersecurity curriculum that hopefully will help some of that content be rolled out in an accessible way across the country. So speaking to number 2, tying cybersecurity real world applications. This one is really personal to me because I got into this field a little bit late. And the reason I found this field is because I shopped a cybersecurity course, and in the first 5 minutes of the class, the professor put up a picture of a shark attacking an underground cable and said, you might not realize it, but physical infrastructure is absolutely tied to cybersecurity. And here are all the ways that it impacts your life. And so I think we actually have a video of that in one of the links that I shared. Hopefully we can throw that in the chat. But you have to find what makes cybersecurity tangible and interesting to you. And I think that we can do better in telling that story to everybody around us. Even more recently, we saw there was I think Canada's biggest internet outage was just back in July. And it was caused by a beaver chewing down a tree that fell on a line. So there are all these really interesting applications to cybersecurity that people don't really realize or connect to the field. I think that's what brings people into the field, is these really interesting stories. Number 3, breaking down barriers to entry. There's a bit of a secret and I think a bit of gatekeeping in this industry where, like Tarika mentioned, you know, there's this perception you need to have a 4-year degree and really intense credentials and, you know, a crown on your head or whatever. That's actually really not true. This field was professionalized really recently, which means that all the people, or many of the people that are writing cybersecurity curriculum, that are actually creating the certifications in this field, didn't have cybersecurity degrees because they didn't exist yet. And actually, some of the most prolific people in this field were music majors. They were philosophy majors. So if anyone's telling you that you can't get into this field because you don't have the right credentials or this, that, whatever, they're just lying. And last but not least, in terms of finding community, as Craig mentioned, there are several great organizations, many of whom are involved in cyber civil defense, that allow you to have that affinity with the field and find people that are also interested. So I think we mentioned Share the Mic in Cyber. There's also Making Space /Cyberbase, an initiative of the R Street Institute, Black Girls Hack, Women in Cybersecurity, or WESIS, Black Girls in Cyber, and several others that I think we can highlight here in the chat.
Thank you so much. So Rachel, I'm going to shoot over to you because we're talking about building a pipeline, but we're also talking about kind of how some of you got into the field. And you had mentioned earlier about Gisela Perez de Archer, I hope I have her name right, and how that influenced you. So can you talk about your point of view and also your thoughts about how to build that pipeline?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to start with a bit of a personal story here because I am probably the youngest on this panel and I got into cyber. I was a liberal arts undergraduate student at UC Berkeley studying human rights and social sciences and ended up empowered to do cyber through the efforts of the cybersecurity clinics and others. But essentially, I, kind of as Tarika, as Katie have mentioned, I was influenced by a very personal role model who was a woman of color in cyber. Her name was Gisela Perez de Acha. She is a journalist currently, but she also was a digital rights lawyer. And, she gave a really amazing presentation at UC Berkeley about how, feminist cybersecurity is important. And as women, we need to be able to control our own digital image and that we can make security fun and interesting and that we can band together and have the strength to get through an industry that is male dominated, that is white male dominated. And we can kind of, repurpose these skills and take them on and empower ourselves to use them to keep people safe in our own communities. And that really resonated with me as a woman of color. My father is from Guatemala. But basically, so that was kind of a personal sort of example. But I think, thinking about too, we need to continue to set up opportunities where girls can learn cyber and not be intimidated, right? And support organizations that do that unique and amazing work, such as the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, Citizen Clinic, right? The reason I'm here speaking on this panel as a woman in cyber today is because of that clinic, which Craig generously funds, and that clinic took a chance on me and said to the undergraduate students studying human rights and studying liberal arts, you can be a cybersecurity consultant for an abortion rights organization. We will teach you how. We will give you the skills. Do not be intimidated. You can put in the time with us. And so we need to continue creating those opportunities. I think it's amazing that Girls Who Code is doing that for girls even younger. And I also think another huge piece of this is conferences and mentorship, right? A lot of the organizations that Katie just mentioned are organizations that I reached out to in my journey as a woman in cyber. And that's where I found my mentors and where I found my support and where I saw, yes, there is a place for me in this male dominated field as someone with no previous technical or coding experience. And so, I feel like I am proof that you can do it, but I would love to see more community built around these things. So that not as many people have to do it somewhat alone like I did.
Thank you for that. You know, Marta, when you think about Consumer Reports, it's all about community. Can you talk a little bit about, the best ways for how do we build this pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We've got about 60 labs. And when I got there, I was like, wait a minute, Craig and I put our heads together. We were like, we need a digital lab. And now that digital lab is evolving into a cybersecurity lab. And I think so many have touched on that it's not enough just to have them. You have to create systems that invite women and girls to join the effort in shaping that. And I also love some of the myths that Katie put on the table, and I'll put another one on the table. And this notion that cybersecurity is only about preventing harm and avoiding bombs. And cybersecurity is also about wiring the world in a safe way that provides all the wonderful benefits of technology. That is remarkable. And so women and girls can shape the present and the future by being part of the change that all of us are seeking. And like many on the panel, I believe that there is a seat at the table for us at cybersecurity, but we have to claim it. And we have to create the partnerships that allowed some of us to walk into those doors. And so I want to welcome anyone who wants to walk in the doors of CR. And I would love it if you would just throw on the chat some of the recruiting that we're doing. And I want to open that up to the folks that are listening and spread the word that CR is a place that is creating those systems of engagement and welcoming a diverse community that has to be able to be on the front lines of the safety and security, as well as the absolute creativity involved in and I would say determination in saying it doesn't have to be this way. We can wire the world differently. And I think girls need to be in that conversation.
Well, speaking of wiring the world differently, I'm going to invite Mary Ellen Holden, who's our Senior Director of Foundation Partnerships, to come on, and we're going to move into some Q&A. We have a flurry of questions. Welcome, Mary Ellen.
Hi, everybody. And thank you, Madeline. And this was a great discussion. I did answer some of the questions already and just asked people to get a hold of me directly. But there were a couple of questions here that I thought would be really, really interesting for people. And one was something that Rachel had actually touched on, which is the whole mental health and well-being aspect of the discussion. And we got a question from Meme Senfit. And it was, how do you see media addressing the intersection of the biases against women aging, which is clearly an issue as well, because we're all talking about younger women, but there is also the issue with older women, women from diverse backgrounds, and the mental health impact of not seeing yourself in all types of storytelling and visual representation. Is there a health and well-being aspect of this discussion, including mental health and financial well-being? And I was going to throw it to Rachel, but because I know that you've done a lot of work on the intersection of psychology and cybersecurity, but anybody could answer the question.
I'm happy to take a first stab at it. I think, well, first of all, I think that media is not doing enough to address this intersection. And I think that we need to push, as consumers, need to push the media to do better on this issue. I think it was really good. So the recent movie that came out, Everything Everywhere All at Once, kind of featured an older woman of color character. And I think that was really powerful and really important. That wasn't connected to technology, but I think that was a really good example of just media diversifying. And I think that came sort of on the heels of a lot of social media backlash, especially, around the times of awards and things, of movies not having diverse enough casts. But I think that there needs to be more visibility into sort of the health and well-being aspects of this. It needs to be publicized that it is a mental health issue and a financial issue. And I think that, some of the work that Craig is funding really speaks to that. And I think that we can all work together to do even better.
Great. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
That's so funny that Rachel would mention that movie because I'm obsessed with it for the same reason, Rachel, that it actually had a grown woman as the protagonist and a woman of color, which was so powerful. And you were saying, you know, it doesn't necessarily intersect with tech. But the thing I keep thinking about in our conversation, and I think several folks touched on it, is that cybersecurity disproportionately affect women and marginalized people, right? Because existing safeguards were not designed with these groups of people in mind, right? So as you think about the set of issues, these complex issues, the more privileged and resourced you are, the more able you are to protect your identity and your money and to be responsive. And that's some of the programming we're actually doing with our students right now. You know, the impact of cybersecurity threats on different groups is rooted in systemic oppression, from racism to sexism, classism. And, you know, this conversation is such a powerful one. And I think, Madeline, you had referenced our relationship with CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And that partnership, along with, you know, the huge shout out I want to give Craig and Craig Newmark Philanthropies, is that all of a sudden, you know, we have been able to deepen and really kind of pursue work in cybersecurity, increasing this awareness about the industry for our students and community, 50% of whom are from historically underrepresented groups. And we have this ambitious goal with CISA. You know, we want to increase the proportion of women working in the industry from 24% to 50% by 2030. And you might think of this as a small thing, but these new courses that we're offering girls in our program, these self-paced courses that are advanced cybersecurity courses, focus in on this marginalized experience, focus in on the power and how they can be empowered and have the agency to address cyber threats and think about, you know, disproportionate support that folks in, you know, experience as they grapple with cyber. And we're so excited for what it means for our girls and our young women and non-binary students to be leading in this moment, especially when I think about what Katie said about the 700,000 jobs that are open and what it would mean for this talent to be able to step into that. So we're just really, really excited. So much of it is about exploring real world events and jobs and other things that could happen in the field.
Thank you. Now I'm going to switch gears for a minute because, Marta, we lost you a little bit while you were talking about the cyber nutrition labels. And I find those to be like one of the most fascinating elements of this entire initiative. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about some of the difficulties you might encounter. There was a question here from Anonymous, so I'll be anonymous and ask the question, but there was concern about what kind of language you could use on nutrition labels in order to make them secure and not biased, I guess. And also, you know, my thought was, what is the timetable for rolling them out? Is it a big sort of light switch for you, or is it a, you know, is it a slow, quiet rollout for this?
Well, I think one theme that cuts through all of what we've been talking about is the overwhelming urgency of everything we're talking about.
Right.
So anything that's prefaced with slow, I'm immediately, I get cautious about that. I think we have to move fast because tech is moving at lightning speed, and government regulators and standards and the guidelines have not kept up. And so here we are, the nonprofit sector, you know, weaving together a fabric that is more equitable, more transparent, more fair, and you know, that's hard work. So we were thrilled to be able to, you know, begin to test and experiment with these nutrition labels. And it really stemmed from work that we started with Craig some years ago when we created the digital lab, because there were no standards in the market around privacy, right? I mean, all the consumer protections that we have in the analog world don't translate into the kinds of tools and privacy concerns that we're seeing in the digital sphere. So we started testing products for privacy. And because there is no government mandate, and when consumers go out to try to buy a television, as Craig says, I want to be sure I'm watching the television and the television isn't watching me, and then taking that information and sending it somewhere else. And we learned that many of the tools we have in our home are hackable, that some of the routers are not safe. So we're taking that same kind of science approach to the notion of nutrition labels. And what we do know about nutrition labels, and what we also do a lot of at CR, is we do a lot of survey work, right? I love the spirit of the question on language, and how do you make sure you use the language that is accessible, that communicates. And so an enormous amount of testing goes on at CR when we're thinking about how to reach the audience. I think what we always like to say is meet the audience where they are. Right? How are they seeing this product? What is going to be most helpful for them when they see a label? And what does that label communicate about the safety and security of a product? So we're excited to get this up and running, and stay tuned. I think we need to move with speed and agility. The market is not waiting for us, and neither is the cyber threats.
Wonderful. Okay. I am going to actually turn it over to Madeline, because we have questions. All of our panelists have said that they will answer the questions offline. So anybody who gives me a name, I will get Jasmine or I will get the questions to the panelists. And Madeline, over to you, because I know we're running over.
And not just the name, we need your email. We need a way to get a hold of you. So
Right.
In closing, I just want to say thank you so much for Craig Newmark, because this wouldn't be happening without him. I want to thank our esteemed colleagues. I hope you have been furiously accessing the links. And I also wanted to mention that October is National Cybersecurity Month, and we are all working on a national campaign called #GirlsLeadSTEM, which Jasmine will put a link to the website for any of you who are involved in organizations around STEM, targeting girls of color. We would invite you to be a participant in Girls Lead STEM, which will be the whole month of October, which we will raise awareness, not only for cybersecurity, but many other aspects of STEM to further engage girls and women. And we want to thank you so much for giving you our time. I want to thank our wonderful ASL interpreters, Nicole and Christine, and I hope all of you stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.